Another day, another lie. The UN apparently created Israel. Nothing could be further from the truth. So, by the time the UN was actually created after the League of Nations in 1945, Israel had already been occupied by the British for close to 2 decades. And it was the British who were trying to push the newly formed UN to be very anti Semitic. Now, when did this all start? It started in 1922 when Churchill stole 78% of the Jewish homeland to create Transjordan, Jordan, which was specifically meant to be only for Arabs. Jews were not allowed to live there, ironically, because Jordan is still finding Jewish artifacts to this day. All of Jordan, all of Gaza, all of Israel, including Judea and Samaria, was considered the Jewish homeland and codified as such under the League of Nations, and it was voted on by 51 member states. So all the British were tasked to do was to return sovereignty to the Jewish indigenous people. There was no talk at all with the Arabs concerning Palestine because the Arabs wanted other states where they actually had history in. That's going to be for another video. Now, who created Israel? Well, Jews created Israel 4,000 years ago. Jews are a race of people. We emerged from the Semitic tribes living in Israel. We have a shared faith, shared culture, shared customs, and we formed a nation. So not 1 year in the 4,000 years being in Israel as a nation has Israel ever been Jew-free. So where did this rumor start that Israel was created by the UN? Well, it pretty much goes back to 1947 with UN Resolution 181. So what was UN Resolution 181? It was a British-led anti-Semitic further tool to divide the leftover 22% of Israel left to the Jews, divided to a further Arab state. Now remember, there already was an Arab state for Arabs in the land of Israel that was stolen of the Jewish homeland in 1922. 78% of the Jewish homeland went to Arabs. Now, Jews were not allowed to live there, like mentioned. So of the 22% left, the British wanted to further divide land for Jews, land for Arabs. So it proposed an even smaller portion for Jews and more land for Arabs, basically creating the Arab terror state that all the anti-Semites now want when they're talking about that two-state solution. Now, luckily, the Arabs rejected the partition plan of 1947, as it is called, and Jews were so desperate for land, any land that was remaining of their homeland, that they were willing to say yes had the Arabs agreed to it. Now, looking back, luckily the Arabs rejected, so the land for Jews was not further reduced. So when people say the UN created Israel, it goes back to the partition plan, thinking that the partition plan created Israel. Again, not historically accurate, because Israel, what happened, Israel was liberated by Jews in 1948 after a near 20-year armed struggle against the British occupiers. So for anyone, whether non-Jews or ignorant Jewish organizations, I hear a lot of that lie being repeated, or in Jewish media that the UN created Israel. It absolutely erases Jewish history, and it erases the bravery of the Jews who fought against the British occupiers for nearly 20 years. And it was a very lopsided fight, because the Arabs in the land who were living there were allowed to have weapons. They were being fomented by the British to instigate riots against Jews, and then who was being punished? The Jews. They were the ones who were ethnically cleansed from Hebron, where Jews lived for thousands of years. They were the ones who were being pushed out of villages after Arab attacks. And so the British definitely went very hard against Jews whenever they would obtain weapons. The jail sentences, the executions, the Arabs were encouraged to immigrate into Palestine, which those of you who follow me know that that's a colonizer term for Israel. It is not some separate entity, not some separate country. And Jews were unfortunately massively restricted in their immigration, in their quotas. That was all part of the anti-Semitic white papers that were issued by Churchill for nearly 2 decades. So it's very important that we honor Jewish history, honor the Jewish resistance groups that actually liberated Israel, and certainly push back when you hear or read that the UN created Israel.